The rejection landed before the coffee cooled, sharp and public, like a plate shattering in a quiet room, and the silence that followed felt louder than the clatter of the cafe itself. She sat there frozen in her chair, not because her body could not move, but because her heart suddenly could not find the courage to breathe. If you're watching Kind Soul narratives and you believe even a little in hope, compassion, and second chances, this is the moment to pause, like the story, comment, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the smallest belief is what keeps a soul standing. Her name was Maribel Cruz, and she had spent an hour preparing for this blind date as if it were a once-in-a-lifetime audition. The red dress she wore was the only one she owned that made her feel like more than the hospital rooms and rehabilitation halls that had defined the last 4 years of her life. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of the modern cafe, catching in the condensation on her water glass and making tiny rainbows on the white tablecloth. Outside, the city moved on with careless confidence, people walking, laughing, stepping without thinking. Maribel noticed all of it because she noticed everything now. Ever since the accident, noticing had become her way of surviving. The man across from her had arrived 10 minutes late and never fully met her eyes. When he finally understood that the chair she sat in was not temporary, his posture changed in a way Maribel recognized instantly, shoulders stiffening with discomfort masked as politeness. He reached for his jacket, muttered something about mismatched expectations, and left without finishing his drink. The door chimed softly as he exited, and the sound cut through her chest like a final verdict. Around her, conversations continued, forks scraped plates, a barista laughed. No one stopped. No one ever did. Maribel lowered her gaze to her hands resting on the table, fingers curled slightly inward, nails painted the night before in a careful attempt at optimism. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who ran morning trails and danced barefoot in her apartment while music echoed off the walls. That girl felt like a distant relative now, someone she mourned quietly at night. The spinal injury from a drunk driver's mistake had taken her legs, her job, and eventually her confidence. Dating again had been her therapist's idea, a step toward believing she was still allowed to want things. Sitting there alone, she wondered if wanting was the cruelest habit of all. At the next table sat a man who had watched the entire scene unfold without meaning to. His name was Rowan Hale, and the world had carved its own lines into his face long before this afternoon. He wore a simple beige shirt with sleeves rolled just enough to reveal forearms marked by old scars from work and life. Beside him stood his 6-year-old son, Theo, small hand resting trustingly against his father's leg. Rowan had brought Theo along because childcare was expensive and promises to spend time together were sacred to him. They had ordered lunch, but Rowan had barely tasted it. His attention pulled again and again toward the quiet devastation unfolding nearby. Rowan knew the look on Maribel's face because he wore a version of it every morning after his wife died suddenly 3 years earlier. Grief had taught him how pain could be invisible and loud at the same time. He watched as Maribel straightened her back, forcing dignity into her posture, even as tears gathered dangerously close to spilling. He saw the way she glanced toward the door, not with hope the man might return, but with a private shame that burned deeper than anger. Theo tugged gently at Rowan's shirt, asking silently with wide eyes why the lady looked sad. Rowan placed his hand over his son and felt something settle in his chest, a quiet certainty that compassion was not something to postpone. Maribel signaled for the check with practiced efficiency, eager to escape before the tears betrayed her. As the server approached, Rowan stood. The decision rose in him not as bravery but as necessity. He guided Theo gently forward, every step heavy with awareness. When Rowan reached Maribel's table, she looked up startled, bracing herself for another misunderstanding, another explanation she did not have the energy to give. What she saw instead was not pity but recognition. Rowan did not rush. He waited until she met his eyes fully, then rested his hand lightly on the back of the empty chair opposite her, asking permission with his posture rather than words. Theo smiled at her with the unfiltered kindness of a child who had not yet learned the world's rules. The cafe seemed to dim around them, the noise softening into something distant, as if the day itself was holding its breath. Rowan's presence was steady, grounded, the way a shoreline feels to someone lost at sea. He pulled the chair back and, in an act that would ripple through Maribel's life long after this afternoon, he sat down and stayed. He did not glance at her chair again. He did not avert his eyes or fill the air with nervous chatter. He simply existed with her in that moment, as though her being there was the most natural thing in the world. Theo climbed onto the seat beside him, swinging his legs, and pointed at Maribel's nail polish with delighted curiosity. For the first time since the door had chimed behind her date, Maribel felt her lungs expand fully. The minutes that followed were not dramatic on the surface. Sunlight shifted across the floor. A server refilled water glasses. Yet inside Maribel, something long dormant stirred. Rowan listened when she gestured toward her chair and then toward herself, explaining her life with careful, economical movements she had perfected over time. He did not interrupt with reassurances or solutions. He let her story exist without trying to fix it. Theo leaned in close, fascinated by her bracelets, by the way her hands spoke so much even when still. Rowan felt a warmth he had not allowed himself since becoming a single father, a reminder that connection did not have to be loud to be profound. Maribel spoke of the accident, of learning to navigate a city that no longer seemed built for her, of the loneliness that came from being seen only as an obstacle or a burden. Rowan shared, in his own measured way, the exhaustion of raising a child while carrying grief like an extra limb, always there, always heavy. Their shared pain did not compete. It resonated. The cafe became a small island of honesty in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. When it was time to leave, Maribel realized she was smiling, not the brittle kind she practiced for strangers, but a real one that reached her eyes. Rowan stood and offered his arm, not to pull or push, but to walk alongside her to the door. Outside, the day was bright and unapologetic. Cars passed. A breeze lifted the edge of her dress. Rowan knelt to Theo's level, whispering something that made the boy nod solemnly before turning back to Maribel with a hug that was careful and sincere. If this story has found its way into your heart, Kind Soul Narratives invites you once more to support it, like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this survive only when kindness is passed along. Rowan watched Maribel leave with a sense that something important had happened, something that would not fit neatly into words later. He did not follow her home or promise anything beyond that afternoon. What he gave instead was simpler and rarer, proof that she was still worthy of being chosen in a world that had taught her otherwise. Maribel rolled down the sidewalk with a lighter chest, the city suddenly less hostile, every curb and crossing feeling a little more possible. She replayed the moment again and again, not the rejection, but the way Rowan had sat without hesitation, the way Theo had smiled at her as if she belonged. Before the final moments of this story unfold, take a second to comment below and share what this moment meant to you or how kindness has changed your own life. Weeks later, Maribel would remember that afternoon whenever doubt crept in, whenever she felt reduced to her limitations. She would remember the quiet courage of a single father who chose compassion in a room full of indifference, and a child who taught her that acceptance could be effortless. The world did not magically become easier after that day, but it became kinder, and sometimes that is the difference between surviving and living. In the soft glow of that memory, Maribel learned that being seen, truly seen, was not a miracle reserved for the lucky, but a possibility waiting for someone brave enough to stay.